Hey man, say man, it's the one and only Jamaica man back at it again with a new and improved quick break. Not 21, not 22, but 25. 25 episodes, man. I'm watching it as a fan myself, and there is some growth. As you can see, the angles are better. You can see this noggin in 4K, clear exfoliated skin, man beard. You feel me? New swag. Still got the people that matter the most to me right here. But I'm thanking you, and I'm glad that you're here, okay? We're going to make this very quick because it's a quick take, quick break. We're in the playoffs right now for the men. As far as the women, they are shoring out their rosters, just finished the draft, and I want to touch bases on that right away. To the WNBA. Before I go into anything else that I'm talking about today, why are you drafting women out of college in the first round? And not even 2 weeks, not even a week and 3 days maybe, you're cutting first round picks. There needs to be provisions against that. I call out the WNBA's Players Association to address that. Help me understand the logic. These women finish a tournament, and within that week they go get drafted. Right? Exhilarating. And then they get to camp. Can it possibly be a farm system? Maybe not. I understand all of the back and forth, but something has to be done. There is no reason why you take first round picks and then you cut them. It's rare in the men's game. It's happening too often in the women's game. Now, we put all this pressure on the men to recognize the balance and free Brittany Griner. Salute to the WNBA at the same time for making sure that her name stays alive. I respect that particular movement. ASAP didn't have to sit that long. It's not like she doesn't have the backing to at least fight the case to be able to be expedited. Something should be done, I would assume, but it's taking too long. So it's not enough first round picks making rosters, and something needs to be done about Brittany Griner. At least having some progress in her being able to get back to the United States. At least allow for us to know. Shout out to the Lloyd family. They've been, they support what I do. Mama Lloyd supports what I do, and I've seen her post on Twitter all the time. She's been praying for Brittany long before it was popular, if that makes sense. So, it's getting to a point where it's like enough is enough. It's getting a little, I would say, political at this point. So let's get these first round picks on some rosters, because we don't even know if they can develop into the talent that you say that they're not, because it would defeat the purpose of drafting them in the first round. Like, stop doing that. It's already hard enough, according to your narrative, that they can't actually be respected as players. We are respecting women as players in this day and age. Now you got to show some respect for yourselves. Players Association, that should not be allowed in your CBA with the WNBA. Help me understand. I'm ignorant to it. But shout out to the Winsider. They're posting. I'm seeing this over and over again. I'm like, what is going on? Like, she just made the tournament. She played well. Why is she not? What's going on? Help me out with that. If you got any comments on that, as usual, just leave it below. You can follow myself at Jamaica Man on Instagram. Follow myself at Twitter at UOPA, you know me, and that's also my handle, Jamaica Man. But at UOPA, you know me, you'll find the content I'm speaking about in regards to this issue. First with Brittany Griner, and as well, secondly, with several first-round picks getting waived, man, before the season starts. Not second-round picks, first-round picks. It's confusing. Nevertheless, we are on task and on the mark with the first round of playoffs. If you see, I spaced it out, so you wouldn't just be hearing me talking all the time, because I know that can be annoying. It's annoying for me at times. But the information that I leave is very important. So I wanted some time to pass. Some time has passed, and we can clearly focus on the meat and potatoes of the game of basketball. And that's just the truth. The men's game and professional basketball game is the meat and potatoes, is where the skill of college and amateur ranks meets the quality of what fans want to see in the game that should be for free, but they've conditioned it to allow for us to enjoy it and a lot of money be made while that happens. So we got several first round contests we'll touch base on to end out the quick break. We'll touch on what has happened thus far and currently ongoing soon. I think game 2 of a lot of second round games, second day is happening. So maybe this is a Milwaukee Celtic day, if that makes sense. They're playing each other, and then the Western Conference, I'm not sure. Phoenix played Utah yesterday, so that would be Golden State Memphis. Cool. So you see how I add that up. So you'll get the same situation here with the first round. I'll try to touch bases on the ones that weren't so entertaining, but what you need to know is that, as usual, I said on my podcast several years ago, but this is where you know what your team is made of. Not just in the playoffs. By this point in the season, with the playoffs, you see that teams are what they are. And you usually, from my story that I've left with you all, we knew what teams were by trade deadline, because that was the last time you could make the team better or make the team worse by losing assets that you thought would register in other ways. So let's start with Toronto and Philly to prove my point, right? So you have a very good team in Toronto. Obviously, they made the playoffs, right? Then you have a very talented team in Philly. The issue with Toronto, as we all know, is they don't have that number one person, right? The legacy of Kawhi, still in a LeBron-esque type way, overshadows the developments that Nick Nurse and that roster with Mesa Ujiri has developed, but they have not found that guy. Shout out to Scotty Barnes for in the first round winning the Rookie of the Year. Shout out to Desmond Bane, according to John Morant, for the Most Improved Player of the Year. I think that's what we have so far. But in this Toronto-Philly series, you have a very so-called talented Philly 76ers team, right? You have what James Harden is, and you're still trying to figure that out. But I think this first round series began to tell us that this gentleman of James isn't the same James that dropped 25 after being traded off of OKC whenever that year was. I'm not going to give out a year, so I don't be incorrect. That's not the same guy. What I've noticed in his progression is that Euro step that we all love from him, that he kind of championed, is not going forward anymore. It's more so going back. So if we knew his finishing at the rim was something that we didn't have to question, well, in this particular first round series, you're not going to see it because they have talent. Tobias, you have himself, you have Joel Embiid, and you just, play through those guys, and that would ultimately surmount Toronto with not really one person that you could say is that de facto guy that can incorporate the great defense that they play and the team chemistry that they have throughout it all of the season. So they made as far as they should have made, given that they can only be so good without a main player. And, right, even though you don't have a main player, you can get this far. And despite having two main players, that doesn't mean that, you're going to beat Toronto. I think they won 6. And the synopsis or the general consensus around the entire basketball landscape is that game shouldn't have went, that series shouldn't have went 6 games. In no way, shape, or form that should have happened. Philly was supposed to beat them. Just off of pure, you look at the stat sheets or you look at the rosters themselves, it's like, oh, they don't have anybody to stop these guys. Cool. In so many words. So Philly moves forward, and they get to take on the winner of Atlanta, Miami, if that makes sense. And Atlanta, their extent is Trae Young is that team. They have a lot of young pieces, a lot of pieces that can be something, but over the course of the season, the reason why Trae Young was astronomical in points and steals, having, I think, the highest input as far as he didn't lead the league in scoring, but he led his team in some sort of statistic that allows for you to know that he's doing everything. Scoring and passing is at an astronomical rate compared to any point of his career thus far. Well, they could only ride that for so long, whereas the Heat, we all know since the 1990s, are a disciplined culture. They revamped that just like Toronto revamped that, but their ceiling is the extent of the talent on their team as well. So it seems like in the NBA, the teams are split down the middle, as I said before, between talented rosters and talents. And that talents can range from stars like a Jimmy Butler, which I respect that he is. I wouldn't call him a superstar, but I will call him a star as one of two people besides Luka to score 45 points in the playoffs this far. Thus far, excuse me. Cool, that's fine, whatever the case may be. That doesn't take away the fact that when you're playing an Atlanta team that's only going through one person, there's not much diversity outside of that. Whereas Toronto is missing that one person to create that diversity. Or if Philly has two talented guys, you have the Heat with a talented system going against a talented player. And they just, competed. But at the end of the day, the system of the Heat surmounted the system of the Hawks. So, no brainer. Atlanta was 10th. They made it far. They got to get help, especially on the wing, to take possessions away from Trey going forward so he can be able to be fresh. And Dame's learning that too, and Portland always got to drop them to play off the ball at times to conserve the fact that at a certain point, they're going to need him to win games. And it's not necessarily the season, it's when it matters most in the playoffs. So congratulations to Atlanta on a great season. Congratulations on Toronto. Salute to the Heat and Philly moving forward. I'll touch bases on what I've seen thus far of their particular competition going forward. Then we'll touch on Milwaukee and Chicago. Milwaukee is probably a little better or a little higher on a barometer like Toronto or a Miami Heat, where they kind of like have the combination of both. A very stout defensive culture, hard-nosed players, talented shooters, but they have that superstar that you could build that around. Obviously, they won the championship last year. But my biggest standout for me against Chicago was Chicago is getting far after having a large drop, but they had a lot of injuries and losing Lonzo Ball and really not being complete of a roster to begin with, not having somebody to balance Vucevic is in that inability to be a floor spacer on defense, being able to slide out in space, or being a consistent shooter and score in the paint. There's only so much he can do. They got pretty far. DeMar DeRozan played outstanding thus far this year, and he literally won a game against Milwaukee when he shouldn't have. Milwaukee lost Chris Middleton too, so that culture is a little more towards, I would say, the Heat, where they have one guy that is very talented in Giannis, but Giannis is a superstar, so he can win you some games. And you're trying to compete against an incomplete roster in Chicago in so many cases. Their holes are from injuries, but also lack of depth at certain positions, and most importantly, pieces that they didn't have at all. So regardless of what happened, they were better than my team first and foremost, even though we beat them. I lost a wager to that. They made the playoffs. We beat them once, but they beat us twice, and they did a lot of winning this year, if that makes sense. But when you go against the championship contending Milwaukee Bucks, even with the injury to Chris Middleton, there is really no true way of you saying, well, Chicago should have won. Not really. Just like Atlanta, they have to retool. I think they may be a piece or two away, and I would want the nucleus that they have between Zach LaVine and DeMar DeRozan to stay and work around that. But I am hearing murmurings that Zach LaVine may be interested in taking his talents elsewhere to command the same fanfare that DeMar DeRozan received this year, just living in Midi-City. Well, shout out to them. Congratulations to Milwaukee moving forward. Then we're going to touch base on the Western Conference. Let's go right into Dallas, Utah. Utah has plateaued. Flat out plateaued. If there's one team in this entire playoffs besides Philadelphia that should be concerned, Utah is the example of what not addressing certain needs and allowing. You don't have young talent to be like they can blossom into something. You have veteran talent that's mediocre, that operates in a system similar to a defensive-minded Toronto. You have a offensively-minded Utah Jazz that specializes in getting open three-point shots. Not in a dynamic way either. It's a drive-and-kick situation to threaten a lob to go bare in the middle of the paint, and everyone knows that it's coming. So much so that Rudy has not been able to be impactful in his dunker spot because there's not much ball movement. I won't even say this. There's an issue between Donovan and Rudy. We've known that before said things have happened throughout our recent past, if you will, as a collective, as a world. Let me say it like that. But schematically, the reason why it has not worked thus far is the lack of offensive diversity from Quinn Snyder. I've given him credit his entire time of being number one in the West at one point, this season, last season, and the season before that, but it plateaus where you're not getting where you need to go with that number one ranking. It can work, but when it matters most, like with Atlanta, you have to do that. So for them to be a veteran roster, they shouldn't have the concerns of an Atlanta Hawks team. They're still budding. They should not have the concerns of a Toronto team either, because they have a star. It may be a all-star in Rudy Gobert, or had, whatever the case may be. They plateau against a Dallas team that didn't even have Luka the first two games because of an injury he sustained, I believe, either in game one or to end the season. Luka comes back and washes them with role players that Utah should have matched up with, if that made sense. Really, if you wanted to make a game, you just allow for the superstars and stars to compete. But I didn't really see much fight, in my opinion, from Utah as far as their role players are concerned. Maybe Jordan Clarkson, but it was a real issue in diversity in how they got their points. And if Utah figured it out, and they knew that your bigs were not going to score, so they're putting Jalen Bronson in a position to get paid like a guy we'll talk about later, because he's always getting his 2 feet in the paint, and you're not allowing Rudy Gobert to be the anchor, and you allow for your wings to funnel the defense to him. So now it looks like he can't guard in the post anymore. He's not effective, but the ball movement has to make Rudy Gobert effective. And you have Donovan Mitchell that's supposed to be manning the offense on the outside, whether that's passing. He learned it already. Rubio told him how to do it his second year in the league. It's not his second year in the league. It's his second year of his max contract, right? So you got to scratch your head. And to relate it to Portland, it's even different from that, because we've never seen the same success in season as Utah. We've made it to the playoffs, but always had to piece it together and eventually figure it out to get to where the team is good enough to get to. I'm not saying that Utah was a championship roster, but they deserve better for the time that they've been together to receive the same result. It reminds me of really, when you think about it, what's the difference between the Deron Williams and Carlos Boozer Utah team and this one? You got two guys that they're playing through. They play pick and roll offense similarly, because that's the only way that you can allow for the defense to draw into both of these players. I'm not saying that the players are the same. You have a big guard in Donovan Mitchell, but Donovan, and I've researched, he's not attacking the rim like he used to. People want to say it's decline, but I'm not about to be a part of any bulletin board material. I just feels like there should be more complementary role players to move the ball to impact the in-between when Rudy can't get that ball, or push the break, allow Rudy's defense to do that. So I'm addressing that specifically before anyone can just rest assured that, well, the roster didn't work or it's Quinn Snyder's fault. You got to find a reason. It's the lack of diversity in the offense. I don't know if that is Quinn Snyder's fault. I don't know if that is, well, Donovan Mitchell's game, as far as his genotype of what he's choosing to impact the game on, is over with, or Rudy Gobert has lost the intensity of what he was to be the two-time Defensive Player of the Year in the first place. I don't think they put all of that together, and it showed by losing to a depleted Mavericks team this year. Tim Hardaway didn't even play at all, matter of fact. For example, he's a nucleus in that offense. Dinwiddie's a year removed from having an ACL surgery. Jalen Brunson, not unheard of, definitely a quality player, but he ate against a team that was number one in the conference even this season. Something's wrong with that, and something has to be done, unfortunately. All right, let's go Memphis, Minnesota. Hey, it was very exciting at first, and then after a while, I'm like, as a hooper, and many other hoopers will relate, it's like somebody rolled the ball out and let them two teams play. It was cool the first two games, but when it looked like it just got away from any sort of execution, Memphis clearly executed because they won the series, but it shouldn't have gone that far in my opinion. Minnesota should have won 4-1, but ended up losing in the way that they did because they just squandered opportunities. I did not want Minnesota to win. I thought they had a more talented roster and culture, but that's previously, as I said, culture has a lot to do with the circumstance of a team being good. Chris Finch is a quality coach. Alex Rodriguez and them just got there. Karl Anthony Towns has been there the whole time. D'Angelo Russell has been there for a while as well. Anthony Edwards, we could say emerged this year, but when you really think about it, what makes them different from the Philadelphia 76ers team that are a little further over the hill? Talent can plateau just like a system can plateau. When you hear players like everything worked out or it just was our year, what they mean is that the talent that you have on a team meshes with the role players and the rest of the roster, and importantly, meshes with the culture of the people that brought you all in. So when the playbook is there, everyone is playing for each other, and they are playing not necessarily to their individual talents, but how their talents work in that culture. That's when they like, oh, it's not a good fit, this, that, and etc. That's why it didn't work. That's why they say those two things. So they say it in passing, but those 3 to 4 things have to connect in order for that to work. And it was something missing, similarly to what we see in Philadelphia in their win over Toronto. But it's something missing within that Minnesota culture that takes away from the talent that they have. Similarly to Philly, as far as I would say, not just coaching, but really putting the pressure on James to be what he was, which I don't think he'll ever be. In this particular case, again, in this particular case, his talent across the board is exciting. Anthony Edwards took the challenge to guard Ja, and Ja took the effort to go back, and Ja is definitely resemblant of how I learned to play basketball, and all of that was exciting. But Game 5, Game 4, you like, man, they playing very fast, but it's really not any sort of. It didn't feel like it was a lot of reading going on there. It didn't feel pick up basketballish because people knew it was serious, but it seemed like Memphis was a more focused team, and that's why they won. Respect to them, and I'll talk more about the first couple of games or where they are now in the next round later. To finish up here, we got Golden State, Denver, and that was okay. Denver's hurt. Denver doesn't have a diverse offense, and Denver realized that the $90 million that they paid Aaron to hopefully be a two-way type of player isn't necessarily going to work. It's not going to work. There was a lot of games where he was single digits and he got exposed because of his lack of creativity to score, which allowed for him to always have to be at the front of the rim. Like, he would do that, and he would get in foul trouble a lot. And that's just the extent of his game. Like I said, in this particular episode, we're just showing the extent of all of the teams and why they may have not or are transitioning currently to be in the second round as we speak. And that's the case for me. It's like they have a hole at the 4 position tremendously. Luka played well individually when he came back. So did Jokic, but it really didn't matter because they're playing against a more explosive, it just works type of team in Golden State. People have bought in. They could play small, they could play big, and arguably one of the most encouraging things I've ever seen in my entire hoop life. And the most disrespectful thing that I've ever seen is that they let one of the best players in the world come off the bench and still beat y'all, encouraging the roster to buy into the culture that allow for the talent to execute and win. The 3 to 4 things I was talking about. I'm still with Golden State. I was wrong about Brooklyn at the top of the list. I wanted to finish with them. But that's all it came down to. The injury-riddled team and the fact that they thought that they could be big and not talented as far as skilled. Bad matchup? Maybe. Brooklyn, Boston, in so many words, the talent of the Nets could not be actualized because they didn't have that much camaraderie. They didn't play together. And I'm holding KD responsible for it. I know he doesn't give 2 cares about that, but in order to carry said team, one player has to do that, and he was in charge of that. He was out this season too. Kyrie was out, and I stand with his situation. But when they started to blitz them, Boston has Ime Udoka, a former Spur, as their coach, and they basically not strapped them up, but made every possession hard. made it harder to get the points that we know we're not going to stop them from getting. And then it exposed the lack of depth that they had beyond just Kyrie and KD. Your next man up is who? So they got to build their team going forward around these two guys, and you got to commit more money to them, and that's a legit question. And they lost to a team that was more experienced than them. And contrary to the belief at Boston here, these players that aren't necessarily, they're at that almost halfway point in their careers as far as ascending to decline, but they were young players in the Eastern Conference Finals. People tend to forget that. They have that experience going against a team that isn't that much more talented than them, and arguably you would have to begin to weigh, like, how much talent is the roster? Because if you take it just individual players, you still have to argue that at this point in their careers. You got to understand that just this season, a lot of players went from being good to being older. You have a lot of players that are being good to not on good teams. You have a lot of players that are on good teams, but they're not the person that you need for them to lead you to win as a star or superstar. These things are finite things that have to work together. And it didn't work for Brooklyn, for what I just said. In Boston, they're in a real position here. So if Brooklyn isn't my favorite now, Boston would be my favorite coming out the East at this time. Just to update you all on that. But my favorite playoff matchup in the first round was the Pelicans versus Phoenix. Because of the two coaches involved, because the New Orleans Pelicans finally banked in on all the help the NBA gave them with literally two rosters of players. They reworked that roster, brought in more people. But in reality, they did not have their best player this entire season. So for them to make it into the tournament, play-in tournament, and scrap their way to compete against a Phoenix team and win a game or two is commendable. So Coach Willie Green, salute to you. And of course, Monty Williams, you've always gotten my salute for being a larger-than-life coach in a way that is humbling to us all. You would never say it, but in the position that you are, you've grown this roster from the play-in dust, if you will, and a championship contender. It's the most, it's the what's the word I'm looking for? It's probably the most ideal scenario for Chris Paul. Monty Williams was his coach the first time. Brass in New Orleans brought Monty Williams in with the Spurs mindset to kind of like get past the Spurs at that point in time. Well, his game has grown as far as the coach is concerned, and the greatest lesson he got was losing to the Bucks last year, and they've been playing focused. He has them committed. So despite that, you got two focused teams, which you didn't see in Minnesota, Memphis, which you couldn't see in Utah Jazz because they were just lethargic. They're tired. They're over the. It's just like, ugh. Chicago wasn't healthy, nor they couldn't compete with Milwaukee despite Milwaukee being hurt. Or Philly having two guys that's just limping their way through, but they still want you to categorize them as superstars, right? Toronto, no superstar at all, just a talented team on defense. So that means you're not necessarily scoring, and you're not necessarily being able to give the ball to somebody to score too, but you do everything else well. And etc. They went at it. Chris Paul hasn't really had somebody that he could tether as far as an opponent his entire career. You could say Patrick Beverly, cool, but I would say Jose Alvarado or GTA, if that is what we're going with, literally stuck it to that man, if you will, as far as competing, contact-wise, if that makes sense. And the rest could only allow them to fight so much, and the win came down to an elbow in the face, and he walking down holding his mouth open, if you will, talking about, man, he can't do that. That's some stuff that I would do. But they didn't allow for it to spill over beyond the court like some of his opponents have done in the past. And I feel like that particular situation, they can go so many different directions. And respect to Phoenix winning that particular series. But more importantly, the Pelicans are on their way, if you will. So moving forward to finish up, we're in the second round. You have Philly Heat shot Philly out. You know, they didn't adjust from a zone going into the second half. And once Miami adjusted by putting more shooters on the floor, it wasn't nothing they could do. Joel Embiid has an orbital fracture from last first round, so he's not even playing right now. Um, you have Dallas Phoenix. I felt like Dallas walked in there assuming that it was okay to be in the playoffs and you could feel each other out. Phoenix wasn't playing with them. Beat the dust out of them, and we'll see if Dallas can respond. But I think the Phoenix Suns are going for a sweep in that one. Milwaukee beat Boston first game, but I feel like Boston could beat them in 7 games when they allow for Robert and Jalen to take the assignment of Giannis as far as funneling in him and allowing for Al Horford to be the anchor that he was to invent the wall that stopped Giannis from advancing 2 years before he won the championship, if you will. And they should be fine given that the scoring outputs haven't changed. And if you notice in that game one in the second round, Giannis didn't really shoot that well. So you have to think about that as well. There is a way. There's will there too. So stay tuned. I got Boston in 7 with that one. Golden State survived a very youthful onslaught by Memphis, if you will. They were in Memphis. The NBA revamped the look in Memphis. This is pretty big. It's not a grindhouse situation. They had Duke Deuce in that thing. Getting this Crunk A Dead on in there. Memphis juking specifically. And it was a good time. But when it was showtime, even though Draymond got threw out, and the same reason why I felt like in the Denver series starting, let me get his name right, Jordan Poole, Deadpool, the third Splash Brother, specifically. You don't play him, or you let him start for Curry in the Denver series, right? They're battle tested, as it was described following the game. You have the starting 5 back, but you start Jordan, if that makes. Oh no, you put Jordan back on the bench or whatever. Memphis, like, they ready for it, but they don't know how deep this is about to get. Like, it's literally splash, big wave. Like, you got to figure this out. I don't know. I don't know if Golden State can beat Memphis in 4 games, but I thought they could sweep Denver in 4, so I'm gonna give them 5. They're not gonna play with them. Phoenix and Golden State are not playing because they know we finish this, we are in the Western Conference Finals. And kudos to Golden State because they revamped from a 13-win season to be here with a deep roster. So yeah, I got. All right, we in the second round. I got Boston coming out. Coming to the Eastern Conference Finals. I got the Heat coming to the Eastern Conference Finals. I have Golden State going to the Eastern Conference Finals. And I have Phoenix. That's what it is. Thank you for your time. Quick break. Quick take, quick break. 25. And I want to leave you with this. You want people to think down. Or you want people to think that you're down. Even when you're up. Because it's a disguise to their eyes. Keep yours on the prize. You want people to think you're down. Even when you're up. Because it's a disguise to their eyes. Keep yours on the prize. Ism.